Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. As Donald Trump prepares for a return to the White House, his foreign policy agenda promises significant shifts in America's global strategy with potential impacts on ongoing conflicts around the world. Specifically, Trump has vowed to quickly end the war between Russia and Ukraine, though details on how remain scarce. Similarly, he promised to bring peace to the Middle East without outlining a clear plan to resolve the escalating Israel-Hamas and Israel-Hezbollah conflicts. As these global crises continue, countries around the world may have to prepare for a new and unpredictable chapter in U.S. foreign policy under the Trump 2.0 era. For more on this, we are joined by Ban Kil-joo, research professor at Ilmin International Relations Institute at Korea University. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Good to be with you.
And also joining us is Ronald Grigorsuni, distinguished university professor emeritus of history at the University of Michigan. Great to have you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
So let's start with Professor Suni. President-elect Trump will return to the White House in January. How much do you think issues like the Ukraine-Russia war and conflicts in the Middle East influenced U.S. domestic voter sentiment?
Actually, not that much. It's interesting that Americans are most concerned about themselves, maybe like many other countries. In fact, the questions that seemed to excite people were about the economy, about inflation, gasoline prices, and the issue that the Trump campaign emphasized so much, the immigration crisis, the crisis at the border, which is much hyped, but it became a very emotional issue. So those are the things that people seem to have really voted on. Issues like Gaza affected some people. I'm in the state of Michigan, and we have a large Arab and Palestinian population here. And young people particularly were very incensed by the murderous brutality of the Israeli forces against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and now they've invaded Lebanon as well. So those issues did inspire or excite some people, but in general, sad to say, foreign policy is less on the agenda of most Americans. They think about their own household, their own stomachs, their own domestic interests.
Right, especially domestic economy was a major issue. Now, like I've said in the intro, Trump's victory is expected to significantly affect international politics. Starting off with the Ukraine war, Trump repeatedly stated during his election campaign that he would quickly put an end to the conflict. Professor, what is the likelihood of an early ceasefire?
Well, you know, he said he would do the war, he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, we'll see if that's possible. And if such a thing did occur, it would mean basically the surrender of Ukraine to Russia, which is not something that the liberals, the Democrats, and even much of the Congress and Republicans seem to want. But Trump's policies seem to be that he wants to get out of wars. He wants to retreat to the borders of the United States. It's a little bit contradictory because in general, America, the United States, as the most powerful, richest country in the world, really has had a policy through its Democratic administrations of trying to maintain its global hegemony, its dominance in all parts of the world, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Europe, the Far East, the South China Sea, etc. And now Trump seems to be talking, at least, through his campaign rhetoric about some retreat from that position. In other words, moving from confrontation and military policies towards something like trade wars, tariffs, trying to compete with China, for instance, which they see as the major adversary to the United States on economic grounds rather than simply military confrontation.
Right. Now, Professor Ban, in this case, Trump did not provide specific scenarios or plans on how he would want to end the war in Ukraine. If he wanted to push through, in what ways could he pressure the two countries for a ceasefire?
Well, as has been noted earlier, during the presidential race, Trump promised to end the Ukraine war within 24 hours to American voters. What matters is that it is almost impossible to end the war in a day simply because the United States wanted to do that. Meanwhile, Since this is a key presidential election pledge, he is in a situation where he should do something about it anyway. I believe he could do one of the two following things, or two ones all at once. First, within 24 hours, he could appoint a special envoy who assumes the duty of dealing with Ukraine war. Second, he could have some phone conversation with President Zelensky and or President Putin as part of the effort to kick off the journey of addressing this issue. Trump might argue that he did something in 24 hours by making the two measures. Once this step is taken, a special envoy team might come up with detailed scenarios. The first scenario is no engagement, which maintains that the United States will not engage in the geopolitical war any longer. To that end, a special envoy could have diplomatic meetings with both Ukraine and Russia just to inform them that it will not engage in the proxy war which is not related to American interests. What does that mean? It means that the United States will stop all support for Ukraine right away. Exactly speaking, this scenario does not mean the end of the war between Ukraine and Russia, but the end of the United States proxy war. Anyhow, this scenario could be in line with Make America Great Again based interests. The second scenario is to make the Ukraine-Russia armistice while benchmarking other cases, including the Korean armistice. In this scenario, a special envoy could act as both a mediator and a coercer simultaneously. At first, the United States could serve as a mediator to promote this armistice, but later on, it could coerce Ukraine and Russia to make a deal with a specific time frame. If they are reluctant to do that, the United States could threaten Ukraine that it will stop all support, and then it will make the most harsh sanctions against Russia. The third scenario is to end the war, not simply the armistice. The United States might press Ukraine and Russia to establish the borderline based on the present front line. If this scenario is made indeed, Ukraine could lose 1/5 of its territory. So it will the worst case scenario for Ukraine. All these scenarios not only make it hard to get things done, but are endangered in many ways. So more serious challenges could arise anytime soon in Eurasian geopolitics.
Right, so not a very easy choice for either any of them. Now, what about as for Russia? It has been stressing that U.S. election is not a primary concern for them, but it's known that Russia is welcoming Trump over Biden. Professor Suni, why is this the case?
Well, Trump has made clear that he likes Putin. He likes strong men. This is something that's become a theme, Orban and maybe even Erdogan, certainly Netanyahu. He has some kind of complex about those people. So maybe he can, in fact, influence Putin in some way. On the Russian side, Putin himself is interested, I'm pretty sure, in bringing the war to an end fairly soon because he is in an advantageous position at the moment. The Russian forces are advancing. There are now North Korean forces in Kursk to take care of the incursion of the Ukrainians there. And this would be a good moment for him to end the war and keep, as Professor Bang said, about 20%, a fifth of Ukrainian territory. That would be some kind of victory for him. Remember, the war began a war of aggression, a war without provocation, a war which is a war crime, because Russia decided it wanted to change the power relationships in that area with Ukraine. It meant to decapitate Ukraine, get rid of Zelensky one way or the other, and maybe put a puppet regime in Kyiv. That didn't work. So now they're in another kind of warfare, a war of attrition, gaining territory, kind of old-fashioned 19th century Bismarckian war to take some territory. Why Russia needs more territory, one may ask, when it's the largest country in the world. It has trouble governing all parts of its own country, is an open question. But now Putin is in the mud of Ukraine, up to his knees, and I think he really wants to find some way out, and Trump may just give him that exit visa that he needs.
Right. Then, Professor, what do you think about the outlook for future relations between Russia and U.S. under Trump?
I think they'll improve in some ways. Now, when you look back at the first Trump administration, which was quite chaotic, nevertheless, he did sort of let Putin have a certain degree of prestige, seemed to be a major figure on the world stage, which is something that Putin very much desires. On the other hand, it was Trump that armed in some significant ways Ukraine and didn't, in fact, let Putin and Russia a free hand in that part of the world. So it's up for grabs. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. This administration that's coming in doesn't have very clear plans. There's a lot of anxiety and anticipation of what might happen, a very unpredictable future for the United States and for the globe with this rather erratic, reckless figure that Donald Trump appears to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, meanwhile, moving on to NATO, Trump has been showing skepticism towards NATO, often questioning its relevance and pushing member states to increase defense spending. Professor Ban, what kind of impact might this stance have on security in Europe?
Traditionally, the United States defined around its 60 allies as its greatest asset. However, Trump defines allies not as assets, but as the objects of a deal to maximize American interests. In particular, Trump defines NATO members as its key target for deal-making, as you mentioned. So, if Trump returns to the White House next January, the issue of their defense spending is most likely to be brought to focus in the same way as the first Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, Trump's bashing of NATO members was based on the fact that they were not committed to 2% defense spending of GDP. Meanwhile, Russia invaded Ukraine, which made them to increase defense spending. So as of right now, a majority of NATO members, including Poland, Estonia, and Latvia, spend more than 2% of GDP on defense. However, in the presidential race, Trump increased its standard, which says that they should increase defense spending to 3% of GDP. So Trump is most likely to officially push them to do so when he returns to the White House. This issue of defense spending could have a negative impact not only regionally but internationally. First, it poses a great challenge to Europe's security because the seemingly decoupling alliance between Europe and the United States promotes Russia to seize the initiative of Eurasian geopolitics. Second, traditional alliance politics might be gone not only in the area of Europe but other areas around the world. The mentality that money matters the most could make alliances vulnerable and make security seriously damaged. Third, Europe could step up the launch of its own integrated independent forces separately from the United States. Fourth, like-minded countries' coordination would not less expected than before. Finally, a revisionist group take advantage of the weakening alliances to change the international formula like liberal international order and rules-based order into their own way.
Right, so we could expect some uncertainties following that. Now, the South Korean government has indicated the possibility of considering the provision of defensive weapons to Ukraine after North Korea decided to deploy troops over there. With the outcome of the U.S. election, Professor Ban, in what direction should South Korea's foreign policy toward Ukraine and Russia go?
Well, Trump's return to the White House presses South Korea to rethink and recheck its calculus regarding its military support to Ukraine because, as has been noted earlier, he is eager to terminate the war right away. The gap in perspectives between South Korea and the United States could be rising. Under the second Trump administration, the United States might not serve as a like-minded country to South Korea any longer. What does that mean? South Korea's GPS, global people state diplomacy, could be less viable without the United States' passion for international security. So, the South Korean government should put more emphasis on alliance maintenance with the new US administration to prevent this gap from rising. Under the alliance maintenance, the South Korean government need to directly talk to the Trump team about its diplomatic and military stance on Russia and Ukraine. Once this step is made timely, South Korea should pay tremendous attention to making a red line formula function while arguing that a further illegal deal between North Korea and Russia makes South Korea's change of policy inevitable in a situation where North Korean troops are dispatched in the front line to support Russia. When it comes to South Korea's foreign policy toward Ukraine, Seoul should send a clear message to Kyiv that South Korea will continue to help Ukraine preserve its freedom like the international society did for South Korea about 75 years ago. What matters most in these procedures is that South Korean president should meet Trump in a shortest amount of time because it could serve as a stepping stone for the alliance maintenance policy, which also contributes to supporting Ukraine at the end of the day.
Right. Now, moving ahead to the Middle East, following the Israel-Hamas war, major changes are expected in the Middle East. Ahead of the U.S. election, Israel conducted airstrikes targeting Hezbollah. Professor Suni, could these strikes be seen as strategically timed and adjusted in terms of intensity with the election outcome in mind?
Netanyahu has used American policy and American politics very skillfully. He is bombarding Gaza. This is a war not only between Israel and Hamas. This is a war against the Palestinian people. Let's face facts. This is a genocidal war. They are starving people in the Gaza Strip. They are bulldozing fields where food could be produced. They're doing the same with roads and parts of the West Bank. This is something that is a war crime of the highest order. And with Trump in the White House, Netanyahu will feel that he has even a freer hand. He's already launched attacks on on Syria, on Lebanon, on Iran, and it's likely that this war will continue. And this is going to be the one that's going to be much more difficult for Trump to bring to a close, because first of all, it's very hard to resist Israel or stop supplying Israel in the United States, because our policy toward Israel is not a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic policy issue. People in America, very significantly and powerful groups, support Israel to the hilt and are relatively, sadly, indifferent to the fate of the Palestinian people, though there's no possible solution to that crisis unless there's a Palestinian state, which is moving further and further from a real possibility.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to clarify for our viewers, Professor Ban, can you elaborate the major differences in Trump's approach to the Middle East compared to that of former President Biden, current President Biden, or other past U.S. administrations?
First of all, when it comes to the commonality, both Biden and Trump define the two-state solution as a permanent remedy to the Middle East crisis. However, their ways of doing that seem quite different. In particular, how to act as a mediator is different. Trump has a tendency to be pro-Israel. For example, in the first Trump administration, the United States recognized Jerusalem serving as a key conflict zone between Israel and Palestine as the capital of Israel by inaugurating the new American embassy in 2018. This event made Palestinians think Trump is partial and pro-Israel. By contrast, the Biden administration often sent the strong warning message to Israel regarding the humanitarian crisis in the war zone, although he continues to provide weapons. The other difference is that Trump prefers a top-down approach, not a bottom-up approach. He is not value-driven, but interest-driven under the transactional approach. He wants to be seen as a strongman to the war, as Professor Suni noted earlier. Similarly, Trump is close to Netanyahu because he is a strong man as well. In this sense, the approach might be more oriented to the deal between the two strong men. If this happens indeed, this approach might not serve as a remedy, but as a power cap because it could bring anti-Americanism back to the region seriously, leading to a more intensified geopolitical crisis.
Right. So with this situation in mind, Professor Sooni, what kind of visible changes are expected in the Middle East when Trump returns to power? Is there a possibility that the Iran issue will be resolved as Israel desires?
Professor Ban put it very, very well. This is a top-down approach. That is, what Trump is interested in is, yes, he would like the war to end because he would like to do business with Saudi Arabia. He wants to increase both his own personal and family and friends, billionaire friends, wealth, etc. It sounds crude to say such things, but that has been the effect, actually, using government for your own wealth aggrandizement. And the Middle East is a bother to him, probably. And it's actually a quite insoluble problem because there is no way out unless some accommodation is made with the Palestinians. But what did Trump do in the first term? What were the Abraham Accords? They were agreements made between the United States and various sultanates and monarchies in the Gulf region to ignore the Palestinian question, to try to make a solution without including Palestine. Well, the Palestinians resisted that, and on October 7th of last year, they launched this attack on Israel, bloody and terrible attack as it was, but to bring attention to the world to their plight. And what happened? Now we have 43,000 Palestinians dead in Gaza. We have 3,000 or 4,000 dead in Lebanon, and we have no restraint by the United States, no significant leverage by the United States with the Israeli government.
Right. We have some more questions prepared for both of you, but we are running out of time, so we'll have to end our discussion here. Professor Ban and Professor Sooni, thank you so much for your time and your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
감사합니다.
감사합니다. Now, thank you so much for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.